Number 5, political polarization and perceptions. The controversies surrounding Hunter Biden have become highly politicised. Critics view the focus of his actions as an attempt to tarnish President Biden's reputation and undermine his presidency, while supporters see them as politically motivated attacks. The polarisation surrounding these controversies has influenced public perception and created divisions along partisan lines. But unearthing family scandals being intertwined in politics is nothing new.
The fundamental question here is, did the Biden family use their public office for personal gain? That's the allegation. And frankly, there are similar arguments about the Trump family. Donald Trump didn't just move to Washington, D.C. alone. Instead, he brought his whole family, and they were also conducting business inside of the Beltway. And I think that this is going to become increasingly commonplace. You're not just going to have two politicians duking it out, arguing on the merits about policy. Instead, you're going to have two politicians going after the other one and going after their family. But I think that, if you take a step beyond that, perhaps distasteful side of politics, there are substantial questions here. The first is, is justice in fact blind, or are the well-connected, do they have access to a type of justice system that, the everyday individual does not? But then the larger thing here is, I think that if you talk to some voters and you don't ask them the question explicitly in lines of Republican or Democrat, but if you ask if someone who has connection to power is able to get a better deal or get some sort of advantage, they will reply, yeah. That's sort of the expectation. And that's very dangerous, because then there becomes this expectation that the institutions aren't actually set up for the benefit of the governed. Instead, this is just a cabal for people who are in government to benefit themselves. And I think that is fundamentally dangerous to democracy. So it's difficult to disconnect the everyday politics from the larger principle. And, as journalists, you and I, our bias, of course, is towards transparency. And I think that eventually we'll get a better idea of just exactly what was going on in these business dealings.
President Joe Biden has continued to deny that he was aware of any of these business dealings.
Mr. Biden, how involved were you in your son's Chinese shakedown text message? Were you sitting there? Were you involved?
No, I wasn't.
Were you?
No.
And how possible is it that Joe Biden is lying when he says that he has never spoken to his son about his overseas business deals?
Based on what Gary knows, there's just not enough information to say one way or the other. Obviously, there are allegations, there are investigative leads that need to be followed up on, but none of the leads that Gary has been allowed to pursue thus far give the answer to that question. There is certainly public reporting out there of things like phone calls between President Biden, or then as VP or after he was out of office, discussing some elements with Hunter, and so again, that comes from public reporting, and that raises further questions about the denials that President Biden has issued. But ultimately, it's just clear there are a lot of other elements that need to be investigated, because these significant leads really raise a lot of questions about the role of Joe Biden in the whole Biden family enterprise. Whether what the judge does or what anyone else does in this instance to say there's a whole two-tiered system is I think a fair accusation to make. But at the end of the day, what Gary wants is simply for the public to understand what happened, and for Congress to be able to ensure that in the future, nothing like this ever happens again, that investigations like this have the independence that they need, and that, when you have such a high profile individual, such a politically connected individual, that's treated the same as everyone else. That's Gary's chief goal, and that's the system that he is striving to ensure that we have in the United States.
And every time questions are asked, the answers are avoided. The White House obviously cops a lot of backlash for protecting the president too much. Seeing as you're right in the thick of this in the press corps, do you agree? Does this affect your reporting?
It certainly does affect the reporting. I think that the American public has a right to know whether or not someone is getting a sweetheart deal, whether or not someone has an advantage that wouldn't be available to the everyday citizen. But the White House, they perhaps do themselves a disservice when they continue to not discuss the president's son. First, you had former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, who again and again refused to answer questions about the president and his son's relationship and these foreign business deals. Now, the current White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she also will not answer pretty basic questions, not about just the past, but about what is currently happening. And I think that the more they try and push this at arm's length, the more you're going to have reporters have their interest piqued. When you try to hide something, that's almost an incentive to journalists to go figure out what the truth is. And already, we've seen that so much of the initial story that was reported back in 2020 was incorrect. And so this is not going to go away. I think that it has only whet the appetite of journalists to get to the bottom of this. And, we know that the president and his son, they obviously have a very close relationship. The question now is, was it only previously that Hunter Biden leveraged that relationship for his own business dealings? We have text messages from him that seem to imply that he did exactly that. But was that only in the past, or is he doing it currently?